Uillinn West Cork Arts Centre podcast. Okay, so hey Jamie.
Hi Gavin, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So could you give a background to the audience here, of a little bit about yourself, kind of artistically, and where you came from?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a Canadian artist, and I've been in Ireland for close to 2 years. And I did my undergraduate degree in actually two Canadian institutions. One is Mount Allison University in the east coast of Canada, in New Brunswick, and then one in the other half of my degree was done at Concordia University in Montreal. So I kind of got the best of two worlds: a small university, and a larger in a sort of more remote little town, and then a much larger university in a big urban center in Canada. So yeah, it was a great blend of experiences. So that's for my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And then I did my MA more recently at Crawford in Cork City. So yeah, that's kind of my, I guess, academic background.
How did you end up coming to Cork?
That's a really good question. So I came to Ireland in general with a working holiday visa. So sort of interested in doing a little bit of traveling and exploring and expanding my artistic practice. And then with kind of COVID lockdown, I had started my 2 years here in West Cork, and based on a sort of a recommendation actually from a Canadian friend of mine who suggested West Cork was a beautiful place to visit. And then, yeah, in the process of visiting, ended up living here,
Sure.
all through the lockdowns. So, and yeah, Cork City and Crawford is just the closest city to West Cork. So, but I've mostly been in Ballyhog actually.
Okay, and so you did a course in Crawford, did you say?
I did, yeah. I did the MA in Art and Process there and finished last December.
Okay, so is this your first kind of like delving into art by yourself outside of college?
So no, I've had sort of like two chapters of post-academic artistic experience. So I finished my BFA in Canada in 2008. So it's been obviously quite some time between then and when I went back to school in 2021. And in that period of time, I ended up participating in a few exhibitions, mostly in Toronto area. So yeah, I do have some experience sort of making and exhibiting outside of school. But then since the MA finished in December, so the first half of 2022, it's been quite a productive period of time, and I've been really well supported through a number of residency programs. So yeah, it's been a fabulous experience.
When you were in college and stuff, and you wanted to become an artist, was there ever a particular kind of medium or style that you wanted to pursue, or that how did you find the kind of medium that you do now?
That's a good question. Actually, I remember in an interview going into college from secondary school that one of the teachers at Mount Allison asked me what kind of art I make. And I sort of said I was happily not hoping to designate a specific medium or material. I really like working across different disciplines and different mediums, and that's always been the case. Like I would have been 18 when I answered that question, so it's been a while since then.
Sure.
So I actually don't. I sort of let the materials guide the process, really. I do have more of a experimental printmaking background, so my undergrad was focused in printmaking. But I've always sort of tried to work at the margins of any kind of technical like skill set. So I usually am kind of blending, whether it's textiles and printmaking or painting and drawing and installation and drawing. sort of a performativity to a lot of what I do as well. So it's really evolving. It's always changing.
And so you're in the West Cork Arts Centre now doing a residency. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I am in the residency here at the West Cork Arts Centre, and I discovered the centre early on in 2019, and then applied for a residency shortly after that. And originally, like many other people, plans were delayed through COVID restrictions and changes to access in the space, and then through just changes, other kinds of life changes that were caused by sort of COVID delays. So I originally was meant to be in residence. I think it was like at first in 2020 and then in 2021, but it actually landed at the perfect time. As I mentioned, like being out of school now, it's been just really, really fantastic to have a studio space and the support of the center and the support of other artists and residents. Like that's one of the magical parts of it, is just being in proximity to other people who are making it on a full-time basis. So.
Sure. And is there an idea or theme behind your residency?
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, my work is evolving so that I'm sort of speaking to in-between spaces and moments of change and transition. And so I'm sure partly being from Canada and living away from my homeland for the past few years has definitely informed the work. Like the work is always for me a reflection of what's happening in my life. Like life and work is really mixed. It's all blended together. So I'm often drawing on the experiences I'm going through. So yeah, as I navigate the sort of distance between and the sort of continual evolution of our lives as they change and are impacted by situations we can't always control or foresee, I find that my practice gives me a place to kind of process that. So in the end, what's been happening is I've been actually moving toward installation. So constructing spaces that blur or obscure the viewer's sort of understanding of the space or experience of the space. So I'm really interested in the tension between clarity and obscurity. So if there's something that is slightly unclear, it sets kind of, I find, a more embodied response. So there's a kind of confusion or a desire to like lean in closer and look closer at something, or stand further back to see if that will help make sense of the situation. And I like that kind of physical engagement, that play between the space itself and making sense of the work. So lots of suspended objects and big rolls of tracing paper. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It does, but is there an example maybe, like, how do you obscure something, for example?
So an example, so like actually through the last kind of series of work that I made through to the end of last year, I had built boxes out of tracing paper. So translucent boxes that were quite delicate, made out of paper. And inside those boxes were pieces of fabric that had been buried by family and friends of mine in Canada. So which I sort of saw as experimental prints or a kind of materialization of explorations of place and belonging and connection. So I took these sort of pieces of fabric that were kind of nuanced in the kind of mark making that they had, and I placed them inside these boxes. So the boxes themselves ended up looking a little bit like a photograph. That because people weren't entirely sure what they were looking at, it allowed for this kind of a broader reading of it. So sometimes people thought it was ice, some people thought it was marble, some people thought it was photograph, and I liked that kind of changing reading of the work. So what I've done more recently is I've sort of scaled up. I've taken these boxes which I'm describing, which would fit in our hands, and I've decided to kind of engage the studio space as if it's its own box. So hanging, you know, about, let's say 10-foot or 9-foot tall rolls of paper through the space, creating a corner out of two pieces of paper that meet, creates or sort of mimics the edge of what would be one of these smaller boxes. So yeah, and then there's room for kind of movement. Like if I had a few people in the studio space that stood behind that piece of paper, and suddenly, you know, it obscures their bodies and their movement. And so the work becomes kind of more performative in a way.
Mm-hmm. And then, so you're assembling all this in the kind of your studio room there in the art center, but is there going to be a culmination of that? Is it going to move to a separate place or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, prior to the residency here, I had a small solo show in Clonakilty at Gallery Asna there. So I migrated elements from that show to the studio space, and then I've been playing with those pieces here. And then my residency ends in a couple of weeks, and I'll be a part of a sort of site activation exhibition at the O'Driscoll building across the street, with a collaborative group called Regroup. So we'll be installing together. There are 10 artists that will be installing work there throughout the course of the Skibbereen Arts Festival. So my intention is to migrate again elements of my experimentations in the studio over to that building, and to work really in response to that building. So oftentimes the work is not completely plannable, like it's usually responsive to the environment that I'm in. So so yeah, that's the next step. That's the next step of these explorations.
Okay, great. And then, so the work you're doing in the Arts Centre now, you are in the process of doing a project called Groundswell Again, is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So I should have mentioned that in terms of like what's happening in the studio space. So there's like studio-based work, which is me with materials, experimenting, exploring materials in the studio space. So that's always going to be true. That's always the way I've made work, that there's some form of material engagement. But then there's been like a really interesting and unexpected participatory element to the work I'm making that has evolved over the course of, I'd say, the last year or so. So that's been about half of the work that's been happening in this space. So I sort of say, broadly speaking, that the work is kind of about generating kinship across distance. So about engaging other people in other places, in a kind of collective project that brings us in contact with one another. Yeah, so basically Groundswell Again is the second iteration of a project that ran last October called Groundswell. And the same invitation went out this time around as it did last time, which was basically an invitation for people to, at the same moment in time across multiple time zones, to lay down in situ where they live, or in a garden or forest or wild space of their choice, and just to lay down for about 10 minutes or so, and then to document that experience with a photograph that gets sent to me. So yeah, so that project just happened actually a week ago today.
Okay, so you'd have photos from around the world at different time zones as well, I can imagine. And
I do, yeah. So basically, so far the photographs are actually still coming in, but I have, I think, close to about 87, and there's 9 countries involved. So if I can count them out, I'd say that, so there's Canada and the US, and then in England and Wales, and then of course Ireland, Germany, and Switzerland and Italy. And there might be one more that I'm missing in there, maybe the Netherlands, I think it was. So yeah, it's really thrilling, because, you know, for a brief moment, across all of those countries, people were doing the same thing at the same time, and they knew that they were doing the same thing at the same time. And I think that informed, for some people who relayed their feedback, you know, that it was kind of an interesting experience to know that they were in sync or lining up with people they both knew and didn't know. So
yeah, it sounds pretty special. But what are you going to do with the photographs and stuff now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, on June 30th, so in a little bit more than a week and a half, there'll be a public sharing or public screening event here at Uillinn. So what will happen is, like, at the moment I'm collecting photographs and I'm time stamping them. So I'm organizing them chronologically so that they run in a kind of carousel, digital carousel, from the first photo taken in time, let's say, all the way through to the last photo. And while, mostly all of the photos fall within a kind of 5 to 10 minute period, which was in and around 3 o'clock Ireland time last Saturday, there are some stragglers that were a little before or a little bit after. So what we're going to do is actually pretty thrilling. Like, what we're going to do is actually project these images onto the exterior of Uillinn, so they'll be able to be seen from outside. And there'll also be the same sort of online archive. So people anywhere and people everywhere basically can see the content. But if you're in Skibbereen or West Cork area, people will be able to come and to actually see the images set one against another in person.
Brilliant. And when's that?
That's on June 30th at 11 p.m. So it's a late night film or image screening.
Okay, great. And then we're setting up right now as we speak, the Members and Friends exhibition for the Arts Centre. You've got stuff in there as well, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I have a print actually. So I have a monotype. So as I mentioned before, I have sort of come from a printmaking background, have quite a bit of experience with painting as well. But I have a small series of prints that I did where I used foraged materials that will come from the landscape. But in this particular print that's in the show, a really good friend of mine sent me some Canadian white pine sprigs that I incorporated into the image. So it's kind of about place and about a moment in time when there wasn't possible to be in contact, where I wasn't possible to be in contact with home. And yeah, like I said, well, my work typically tends to be like quite kind of, in a way, autobiographical or connected to my personal story. The hope is that, that it's relatable, or that other people feel their own experience within the images or projects that I am putting out into the world.
Brilliant. And I'm not just bigging you up, but I said it to you before, but the postcards and stuff that you have in the Sense of West Cork are some of my absolute favorite that I've seen since I've been here as well. So people can also see your work through that.
Yeah, thanks. I know that's kind of you to say, Gavin. So yeah, I mean, kind of running alongside my more conceptual based work is a little business called Ashforth Press. So I sort of launched a number of different kinds of images that are a bit more realistic and a little bit they're mostly painting based, so they're largely animal or kind of vegetation, flowers and vegetables and that kind of thing. So yeah, they're here at the center as well.
Okay, and then when is the O'Driscoll collaboration project happening?
Yes, that's a good question as well. So we are running the exhibition from July 22nd through to August 1st, which is the duration of the Skibbereen Arts Festival. The opening will be 6 p.m. on July 22nd. And we'll have open hours every day. But what makes this exhibition slightly different than others is that we intend as a group to activate the space so that it changes day to day, because what we're interested in, we're a group of 10 artists that have been meeting online throughout sort of restricted times. And this is the first opportunity that we have to make work together in the same space. So while we might not necessarily be collaborating, we're interested in what happens when we set our practices next to one another. So a large number of the 10 of us will be present in this space throughout the Skib Arts Fest. And we're curious to see how the work we make in situ basically is responsive to that group experience.
Okay. And then for people that can't make it into Skibbereen for whatever reason, is there a way they can access your work online?
My work personally, or the work of the
Your work personally?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So there's two ways. So I have a website, which is my full name, Jamie Ashforth at .com. But I also have a fairly active Instagram account, and that's Jamie_Ashforth. And that's where I find a lot of, it's a good platform for me to be able to share small segments of my day-to-day practice, which is largely photo-based, for online stuff. So yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. So you have like a whole realm of work there that people can access in many ways in and around Skibbereen for the next while anyway. So
yeah, exactly. I've never really thought of myself as a photographer, but I think, like we all carry a phone, a camera in our pockets with our phone. So I think all of our relationships with photography is sort of evolving, but I found that like taking photographs and playing and experimenting with that as its own medium has been really, really, really generative. So yeah, that's happening too.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jim. I think that covers it. We, like you said, there's plenty of, if people want to check out your work, there's, in and around here and online, there's plenty for them to see.
Yeah.
All right. I really appreciate that. And thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Gavin. This is great. Great to speak with you. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Uillinn West Cork Arts Centre podcast. This podcast was brought to you by Uillinn West Cork Arts Centre and made possible with support from the Arts Council, Cork County Council and the Department of Social and Family Affairs. Information about Uillinn West Cork Arts Centre's artist residency programmes can be found on our website and our social media.